biggest project called The Future of Memory, led by Olga Ștefan. And we decided to choose this screening, this documentary, because it's about the topic of human rights, and we previously made some other screenings about this topic also, related more with the conflict of Palestine. But we also decided to make this screening because recently on the 27th of January it was like this International Day of commemoration of Holocaust. And yeah, about the documentary, I would like to say a few words. It compilates like different real testimonies of the last survivors of the anti-fascist resistance of the Holocaust in Romania, Czech Republic and Slovakia. And we also invite you to stay a little bit longer after the screening because we will have Olga joining us online to answer the questions. And yeah, you also have like tea and some food, so serve yourself and make sure that you open it.
Yeah, hi. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Hey? You can hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Salut, vorbim în românește sau cu ce limbă facem?
We will speak in English because half of our audience is English speaking audience.
Okay,
But
okay.
Those who want to ask or talk in Romanian are welcome. We will try to moderate and translate eventually. So thank you all for coming. Thank you all for accepting first of all, sharing your film with us and accepting to join us this evening. We know each other from 2017, and I know Olga mainly as a curator of Proiecția, but who is interested in topics like politics of memory, identity, migration. In 2017, I think there was the project The Future of Memory was already started, and here in Zpațiu, where we are now, we hosted a series of film screenings and also an exhibition by authors, survivors of Holocaust. And also I remember we did a tour of Chișinău, of Jewish part of Chișinău, but also it was a tour of the former ghetto area in Chișinău. Even us locals, we were not aware, or some of us, it's not obvious, we don't know it by walking in the city. So in the frame of this meeting, we actually had these different encounters, and which allow us to understand better the history of Jewish population from Chișinău. And
and we also, in addition to the Jewish population, we also hosted, if you recall, a discussion and a debate about the Roma genocide in deportation in Transnistria. And at that time, we partnered up with two organizations in Chișinău that focused on the Romani experience, and we invited two historians to speak about that particular topic as well.
Exactly. Thank you for adding this topic. It's very important that we try to cover different aspects of the Holocaust. So I know you a little bit, but could you introduce yourself and your background to our audience, please? Maybe how come you start to curate contemporary projects, and eventually maybe you explain your interest in politics of memory, and also if you have any personal connection to these topics which the film makes reference to.
So regarding my contemporary art background, I am originally from Chicago. I grew up and I studied in Chicago, and I worked for about 10 years, maybe 12 years in Chicago in arts administration as the director of two organizations in Chicago, arts organizations, and we were focused on contemporary art, contemporary artists, and the condition of the contemporary artist, and exhibiting contemporary artists, supporting contemporary artists in their professional development. So that was my background in Chicago, and then in 2009 we moved. My family and I moved to Zurich, and in moving, I changed gears to some extent, and I started freelance curating exhibitions of contemporary art. And as I was curating these types of exhibitions, mostly focusing on the migration experience and the immigrant experience, of course, is very personal to me as well. I encountered a story in one of the exhibitions that I curated, an exhibition that was called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Hospitality as Artistic Practice. I encountered the history of the very famous artist Daniel Szperi, if maybe some of you have heard of him, a Fluxus artist. He's in his late 80s at this point. And he lived in Switzerland for the majority of his life, but about 20 years ago or so moved to Vienna, and he's been living there. But in researching, so I included a work of his in this exhibition that I curated, and in researching his biography, I realized that his father had been killed in the pogrom of Iași. Maybe some of you have heard of the Iași pogrom of 1941, and he was killed in that pogrom on the same death train that my great-grandfather had been killed on as well. So this kind of shared fate brought a lot of layers of questions out, and it kind of launched my research into this chapter of history and into my own past, into my own family history. And I curated, for example, an exhibition later called Fragments of a Life that took place in Iași, and that basically brought together a variety of different artists and personal stories that traced their own history to the Iași pogrom. And within that exhibition, I also made a video with my grandmother, whose father it was that was murdered on that death train, exactly like the father of Daniel Szperi. So that's really how all of this actually began. And after that exhibition in Iași, the following year, I launched the platform, The Future of Memory, which focused on a variety of different spaces and cities in Romania, and bringing to light basically how the Holocaust manifested itself in these various parts of the country, under different regimes as well. And for example, Transylvania was under the authority of the Hungarians during the war, so the Holocaust there manifested itself very differently from how it manifested itself in Bucharest, for example. So the project had exhibitions in 5 different cities: Bucharest, Oradea, Cluj, Iași, and ultimately in Chișinău, at Zpațiu in 2017.
Thank you. Let's go to the film itself. Can you, it's probably one of your latest works. Can you tell us more about its production, how complex it was, maybe how did you meet your personages, if you knew them or someone recommended them to you. Also, maybe you can expand a little bit on the format of documentary, because you are using it as one of your regular formats of work. Where was it presented, the film, before? And if you can describe a little bit the process of creation of the work.
Yeah, so the movie was finished in 2019. It was started at the end of 2018, but in order to actually start producing, we had to get financing and funding. The platform, The Future of Memory, was launched in late 2016, and then implemented in a variety of different exhibitions throughout the country in 2017. So January, May, June, and then later on in Chișinău in July. So, you know, these dates basically coincided with pogroms or dates of deportation, major dates of deportation. So the Bucharest pogrom was in January, so we had the exhibition in Bucharest at that time. In Oradea and in Cluj, they coincided with the ghettoization of the local Jewish population there and the deportation. Then in June, it was the pogrom, and then later on in July, we had the exhibition in Chișinău. And basically, we had to apply for funding to a European body, and it was the EU diversity. I don't remember exactly what the scheme was called, but some European funding program. And we partnered up with 2 additional organizations, one in Prague and one in Bratislava, so Czechia and Slovakia. And these 2 organizations were also dedicated to memory, doing oral histories and recordings of survivors and so on. So that was really important that we had these partners that focused similarly on recording oral testimonies. So I focused my research at that time on anti-fascist resistance, and I wanted to find out what forms of anti-fascist resistance can be identified in Romania. And of course, in Romania, you didn't have like a real movement like you had in France or, you know, the partisan movement in Yugoslavia. There were just very small actions that could be identified as, you know, resistance, let's say. So, you know, for me, that was a challenge. I really wanted to find how this sort of anti-fascism or resistance can be described in Romania. And So I approached one of the organizations in Prague to find an individual that connected our countries, historically and geographically. And that is, of course, Ericka Bezdickova, who literally moves geographically from Czechia to Romania, walking across Europe to go find her sister Jolana, who had married a Hungarian Jew that she met in Terezin, and with whom she moved to Cluj. He was originally from Cluj, and they moved back to his original place of residence. So she starts the film, and she basically, opens up this discussion about the interconnectedness of the fate of Jewish people during this absolutely horrendous period in history, and their fates, how they were interlaced. Despite, of course, coming from completely different backgrounds, completely different trajectories, etc., this moment in history basically created the same fate for all Jews, ultimately. From there, I worked with these two organizations to identify other individuals that qualified for the type of anti-fascism that I was interested in focusing on from those countries, from Slovakia and from Czechia. And then I submitted my questions to those organizations and asked them to interview those individuals. So the people that you see being interviewed in Prague and in Bratislava were actually interviewed by our partners locally based on the questions that I sent them. Because I was trying to gain insight into a specific type of experience. And then the Romanian survivors, I identified myself through my own research and found them and ultimately managed to trace them. That was like a really, really difficult process. Not necessarily Alexandru Elias, because Alexandru Elias at the time was very well known, but trying to track down the daughters of the Vapniarka survivors. It took months and months and months of research trying to find them, to find their phone numbers, to figure out where they had ended up, because nothing was clear. It wasn't written on any, website like the descendants are here. So, I had a lot of research and a lot of trying to get in touch with different organizations, with different people. It was a lot of work. So finally I did manage to get in touch with them, and then I of course had to find a camera person and make sure that we can afford that. I mean, it was like a huge undertaking. So find a camera person, work with somebody on site to go interview them, and so on. So we have Perez Moses, who at the time was in her late 90s from Oradea. She had survived Auschwitz and various other lagers and camps, and she died at the age of 102. So we interviewed her in Israel at her home, and the two daughters, so the second generation as well, we interviewed them in Israel. And then Alexandru Elias was, Theodora Iancu, also the other daughter of a survivor who was Marcel Iancu. So 4 people were interviewed in Israel at their homes, and Alexandru Elias was the only one that was interviewed in Bucharest in Romania, from the Romanian crowd, from the Romanian group, let's say. And so that's basically how that part came out. So I, had to work with the camera person directly. I was the one interviewing the 5 individuals that were Romanian speaking. And the other ones, I submitted questions to our partners who were on site there in those cities to interview the individuals who were living there. And then we got this material, and it became, the work of actually editing all of the material. Each individual produced about 2.5 hours of testimony. So we had 9 individuals in total, and each one was about 2 to 2.5 hours. So it had to be edited down. Those 18 plus hours, maybe 19 hours, had to be edited down to 1 hour, So it was a huge job to, first of all, transcribe all of their testimony, and then after transcribing it, making sure that what is of essence is transmitted in the film.
It seems a huge job, and congratulations. I think we all had a great experience of watching the histories and then trying to follow the histories of those people. I would like also to encourage you to address questions or think of questions. I will continue with my few more questions, but please feel free to join. We slowly went already into the content part of the film, and you mentioned the different forms of resistance which you try to capture with your film. Actually, the film starts with a quote of Simon Weishaupt, which says that everyone is obliged to resist, and this was something that made me think. I never thought that to resist is an obligation or is a kind of duty that we have as citizens or as people. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Why is it so important?
Well, he actually, the whole quote is very explanatory in and of itself, because what he says is that we have the obligation to resist when it's still possible democratically to do so. So we live in a democracy still, with all of the limitations that we encounter in this democracy, but nevertheless, it is still something called a democracy to the best of its possibility of existing. And it is our duty as citizens to use the means offered by democracy to shape the society that we want to live in. So, we need to do that when we see that rights are being, stepped over, like civic rights and human rights and so on. If that starts occurring, it is our obligation also for self-preservation to utilize the means at our disposal through democracy and through the democratic process to stop that. Otherwise, we will end up in a situation where our only option in order to reclaim those rights is to fight, through, armed resistance. And basically he's saying, rather than reach that point where our only option is armed resistance, we better take advantage of what we have now and stop the political machine that is moving on top of us, and obliterating our rights. So we better, take advantage of what we have now to stop that from happening and, reaching a point where it is too late.
Thank you. May I ask, you structured the film in 4 chapters, and you speak about armed resistance, civil resistance, and political resistance, resistance through art, and resistance through solidarity. Did you think, or did you have during your process of producing this film other kind of encounters or meetings that would also speak of other forms of resistance which maybe didn't end up in your film, or you thought that your film could also include other forms of resistance, if you had any experience with that?
Well, you know, for example, scholars and academics often write of, you know, besides, of course, those, first of all, you know, the armed resistance was really the most lionized and the most referenced type of resistance during, for example, the communist period. You know, there was no other type of resistance possible but the partisans, or, you know, the French resistance, or, you know, these types of struggles that were armed struggles, because they could easily be turned into heroics. However, the majority of people survived not because of the armed resistance, which was very small, in fact, in comparison, of course, to the Nazi machine, which had allies and supporters among all of the European countries. And, you know, it was due to these alliances and support from every single European country almost that the Nazi machine was able to destroy so much of humanity. So it wasn't due to this armed resistance that the majority of people who survived managed to survive. It was much more due to acts of small humanity and actual will to survive. You know, just pure sheer will, and various other forms, you know, as I mentioned, solidarity, civic acts, you know, all of these acts that basically can fall under the idea of humanity, human gestures of resistance to inhumanity. So, you know, there were scholars, for example, also talk about spirituality or spiritual resistance during the Holocaust, meaning that a lot of Jews, just by practicing their religion, performed a certain level of resistance, because to be Jewish was literally illegal, and it was something that you died for. You were killed because you were Jewish. So to actually practice yourself, to manifest yourself, and to you know, practice your religion became an act of defiance that was categorized as resistance. But I didn't put it in there because obviously, you know, that's very personal. It's a very personal thing, and not all the Jewish people that I interviewed were religious people. The majority of them were secular people and were not spiritual individuals. So for them to practice humanity was not a religious element. It was actually how they were taught about humanity, literally coming from the concept of humanism, and you know, that was their conviction, you know, that humanity does not necessarily belong within the precepts of a religion. So for me, it was much more important to show much more, how shall I say, the gestures that were universal and that could be practiced by everybody, by people who were not Jewish, in order to support Jews as well.
I can continue. On one hand, I would like to go back to the documentary to discuss a little bit this form, how impactful can it be today, because that's probably one of the few means we have access to speak about topics, like hard topics like this. Maybe you can say, what do you think, how powerful this tool can be today in our context, especially considering the the new circumstances which sort of make me think, I don't know what you think, with the ongoing wars, I mean that started after 2019, after you made the film actually, in Ukraine or the recent war in Gaza, and I wonder how much our political leaders learned from Holocaust and from Second World War, and why it seems to have this tendency to repeat itself. So maybe you can touch upon both documentary film as a tool and about this renewal of this violence in the world.
Well, it's not a renewal of violence. It's just like I don't think anything has ever stopped the violence. I mean, you know, as you very well know, everybody knows, after 45, you know, the world has been an absolute war non-stop. Maybe not in Europe. You know, we can say that at least in Europe it stopped for a while, but you know, Korean War, Vietnam War, whatever, all of the wars that have been ongoing over and over and over and over were exported elsewhere, but they were ongoing, so it's not something that is new. But, you know, in terms of genocide, I guess, you know, if that's what you're referring to, because war is, it seems like a constant condition of humanity, unfortunately. And not all wars are equal, and that's very important, you know, to talk about. You cannot claim that every single war is a genocide. So, you know, those are differences. You know, of course, the term genocide is very politicized, and everybody wants to say this is genocide if they oppose that individual country that is, you know, the aggressor, or that is perceived as the aggressor. It's very easy to throw the term genocide at that aggressor in order, of course, to politicize the situation and make yourself look much better, for example. So not every war is genocide, no matter how many people die, you know. But if we are talking about genocide, you know, there's been so many recently. You know, we've had several genocides. So, you know, it's very difficult, first of all, to prosecute genocides. We've seen that. The individuals that were guilty of genocides, it takes years and years and years for that to come to a conclusion through international courts. So, you know, it's a very difficult question because we're not sure. I mean, I'm not necessarily sure specifically what you're referring to, or I'm not exactly sure what I can say to that. I mean, it's a very broad question. War is ongoing. It will unfortunately be ongoing. I don't see any hope, really, that humanity will stop fighting wars until it self-destructs, ultimately. I just don't see that it can, that these nation states with the type of infrastructure and structure, you know, that they rely on, will stop. You know, their industries are completely, inherently connected, and their wealth to the war machine, to the, you know, weapons industry. What can I tell you? I don't know. It just doesn't seem like this type of thing will ever end. So, of course, we need to talk about the ways to resist, you know, the elimination of human rights in democratic societies, you know, and if we have the resources left to try to change and encourage other societies to allow for more human rights in their own societies, that would be ideal. But, you know, it's a very humongous topic that I don't know how to even, you know, grab.
Maybe you can elaborate at least on the role of documentary film in this and artists. Even in the film, I think in the end of the film, one of the personages say that it's not enough to tell our pain. It will change nothing. So how do you feel about that? Like, what else is missing? I mean, what else can we do? And how to transform a solidarity act into action? What would be your suggestion?
Well, I mean, solidarity is already an action, and it is already at the beginning of something. Unfortunately, solidarity is always limited, and if we think at our own actions as individuals, we always extend solidarity to those people we maybe empathize with the most. So there needs to be like some sort of connection, human connection. We're very faulty creatures, and we're very our ability to empathize is also limited. And some people rely on religion to kind of push them to be empathetic by force or by the law of God, let's say, because otherwise we have limitations, emotional limitations to what we're willing to give for somebody else. So, it's a very, very hard topic, but, the concept of obligation, maybe not necessarily religious, but also human, we need to be taught and we need to be educated and we need to be drilled into accepting a certain obligation of acting and performing humanity on a very general basis. We see somebody in a moment of hardship, we need to extend our resources to help people in, moments of hardship. And, some of these things are, of course, the duty of the state to kind of impose on us to some extent. It's also the education that we get from home, or maybe at school, we're taught how to behave with others so that we ourselves are also, feeling integrated and well among others. So, this concept of community needs to be somehow taught, in a very individualistic society in which we now find ourselves. So we kind of got to go back to this idea of civic duty, communal living, and how we engage with the other when, hardship is everywhere around us. So, these are just some tools, but, in moments of crisis, obviously people need to get together. Like, even in COVID, those were moments of crisis when people did rely on mutual aid and did help each other. And, I saw many gestures of very, very profound solidarity that were impressive. Of course, there were other things that were, individualistic and not very nice. But nevertheless, there were examples of mutual aid and real help from people, not only the states or, municipalities, but really people helping each other through the hard times.
I will launch again the invitation to our public, but also to the online participants. If you would like to address a question or maybe comment on the discussion. Yeah? If you want to ask a question, please come here.
Hello, Olga. Thanks for being here today with us. I would like to ask you if you still keep in touch somehow with the persons who participate in the documentary, and if you can tell us, like, if your relationship maybe goes farther than this interview.
Unfortunately, everybody has passed away with the exception of the second generation. And even Theodora Iancu has passed away, unfortunately, during COVID, in fact. But yeah, after the making of the documentary, I kept in touch with everybody regularly. With some people, obviously, I was closer than with others. With the Romanians, I was in constant contact and very close, in fact. With Teresa Moses, I was in touch all the time. We spoke on the phone, we emailed, and I'm still very good friends with Ella and with Veronica. But the others have passed. Everybody else has passed away. And some of these testimonies were the only ones that they actually gave, and that's actually very important to mention, that while some had given testimonies before, like Ericka Bezdickova, there's even a movie, I think, about her, and she had made other testimonies, filmed testimonies. The majority of the others had not, and this was indeed their only testimony, their only recording.
Someone else? You can come here.
Can you hear me if I speak from here?
I think she cannot hear. It's better to come here. Yes.
Hi, and thank you for your amazing documentary. I am curious to know, like, how do you perceive, like, now in the aftermath, the success of this story? Like, what do you think that has been achieved in terms of people, like, perceiving the history differently, and also the different religious, ethnic dividing lines that are still persisting in our society? Like what have you seen is the change or potential impact, and like what would you wish that this documentary can bring more? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So yes, I have screened the documentary in many contexts, at universities, a lot of universities, in fact, and I've spoken to a lot of students in art centers and cinemas, online, many times online, even during COVID, for example. There were several screenings during COVID. So it has been screened a lot. But of course, the life of a documentary is always, you know, you gotta work it, basically, and you gotta constantly push for it to be viewed and to be seen. If indeed it's a political documentary, and of course it has a political mission, it becomes a huge process trying to get it seen by as many people as possible. And indeed, this documentary has a very timely message. And in terms of actually changing, you know, what can I say? You know, nothing changes anything until people themselves are willing to change themselves, right? So, you know, you can give them one documentary, but one documentary is not going to change a person completely. If it does, of course, you've, you know, hit the jackpot, but, you know, it's not something that you can actually wish that it transforms society. Like, you know, the idea that one documentary transforms society is, you know, I don't know who actually even claims to have such a hope. But, you know, for me, what is really important is to inform the viewers of these particular chapters of history that are not necessarily spoken about quite so much within the frame of Holocaust education. So, you know, about these particular individuals, how they resisted, what they did in order to show their dissatisfaction, to show their opposition, to show that they can keep their human dignity when every force around them is trying to exterminate them. So these are stories of individuals that did what they could, risking their life, to do something, and some of them were communists, some of them were not communists, but the stories of communists are also important, and they really need to be told, because the communists in that period of time were some of the only ones who were actually very engaged in this type of anti-fascist resistance, like real engagement, physical engagement in anti-fascist resistance. So that's very important to talk about. It's also important to talk about how the communist regime afterwards, you know, turned on those people and purged those exact people that had been supportive of the communist ideals. So, you know, we see with Otto Cinco that particular story, you know, that after the war, he was purged by the communist regime, and for him, freedom, as it's said in the documentary, came only after the Velvet Revolution. So, you know, these are stories of how history changes and transforms, and the changes that these people actually survived, all of the changes of history that these people survived, and what they did in order to maintain their humanity, what they did in order to maintain their human dignity through all of the changes and all of the elements of oppression that they went through. So, you know, the story is one of survival from every direction, and basically what is happening right now with these fascist and right-wing movements that are taking ground again. And basically the fact that we still have the chance to stop them is indeed the conclusion of the documentary. We have this opportunity that seems to be closing in on us if we don't do something about it, you know, and the more we stall, the more that we don't act, the more it is likely that all of our seemingly democratic countries will ultimately end up right-wing, like in Italy, like in Sweden, like now in the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. And, you know, of course, Netanyahu, that's been there already for some time, and so on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olga, very much. It was for being good with us. It's a very hard topic, and we still learn about it, and your film helps us to understand better your perspective. I propose to end here, and but we keep in touch, and we wish you new